and basically they'll pay them off with arms and munitions to protect themselves, and in return, that tribe will harvest all the diamonds, and pretty much as soon as they get close to eradicating the other tribe, they'll pull out all those munitions and give it to the neighboring tribe that they were at war with, and it's just this pretty much this cycle that goes on and on and on. Without completely eradicating either tribe, they just dwindle them down to nothing. Well, and in return, that's how they harvest the diamonds.
Absolutely, and at the same time, keeping these factions fighting with each other. Because again, I remember posting a story about this just a while back about the actual son of a former French president and an Israeli-Russian billionaire. These are only 2 guys among 40 that are charged with trafficking arms to Africa. So these are the people who are putting in money into all of this stuff. Because again, you end up wondering, each almost like every new half a year or every few single months, you hear about some new dictator, rising to the top in some, already, very setback country, so to speak, of Africa, and that already is in a very bad state. But someone new comes along. And here they come with their, bombs and their guns, and who's financing these people? It doesn't just happen out of its own. They don't just.
It doesn't pop up out of nowhere.
There you go.
It's always an unseen hand. Yeah. It's always an unseen hand, and usually, especially when you're talking about finances, it shifts and it changes hands so many times that the paper trail really loses itself. So it's kind of difficult to see. Where it's truly coming from, but it doesn't take a lot of ingenuity to figure it out. Usually, you look at obviously it was the same thing with 9/11, and it was the same thing with a lot of these false flag terrorist attacks. Just look at who benefits the most, who benefited the most from the Patriot Act, the Homeland Security Act. It's those are the ones that you really have to look at first, because isn't that what we do in when authorities when detectives are investigating a crime of some sort, you look at who would have had motive.
Yeah.
So that's really just the most logical way to even look at it. So, but it's just an unfortunate thing that usually without hardcore evidence, it doesn't really make a difference to people who really just don't want to. Actually, see if I can find it. I have this quote by Nikki Rapana, who actually talks about, she does a lot of articles about the communitarian law.
That's funny that you mentioned that, because we're just right now in contact with Nikki, and we're going to have her on pretty soon here on the show, actually.
She's an excellent researcher. I've talked with her recently, actually when I was starting to film the movie Kymatica, because I want to use a lot of her. She made an excellent article called CAFTA, the EU and communitarian law. And what's interesting is communitarian law is it has a lot of parallels too, but it is not the same as maritime admiralty law. So I found that interesting because I've been doing a lot of research on maritime admiralty law, and that's interesting enough. But anyway, my favorite quote that she even put in that article was, part of the problem is the American people don't believe there are any more Hitlers or Stalins.
There you go.
And I thought that was perfect, because and it's not that they just don't believe it, but they don't want to believe it.
Right.
They don't want to believe. I mean, like, deep down inside, obviously they feel that they're being governed. Spiritually, psychically, soulfully, they know they're being governed, but
in many cases they want to be governed as well.
Well, absolutely. Actually, another thing I wanted to mention was both Wilhelm Reich and Arno Gruen speak about, especially Wilhelm Reich. He talks a lot about sexual suppression and what's this book? The Invasion of Compulsory Sex Morality. And he talks about what is called the incapacity for freedom. And I'm going to try and find this quote that he gave. It was just absolutely excellent. But he talks about it's an incapacity for freedom that we have because of our sexual suppression and perversity, because that's a natural biological function that we're then repressing. And here's the quote. When he's talking about sexual suppression supports the power of the church, which right there, that says it all. But sexual suppression supports the power of the church, which has sunk very deep roots into the exploited masses by means of sexual anxiety and guilt. Now that's compulsory sex morality right there.
Yeah.
And he goes on to say, it engenders timidity towards authority and binds children to their parents. Which I go on to say, I mean, saying it engenders timidity towards authority and binds children to their parents. In my words, not only does it bind these children to their parents, but since we're not really teaching our children anymore, you know, how to live differently than we did, since we're not putting them in, or since we are putting them in the exact same scenario that we were put into, which gave us our psychological schism.
Yeah.
These children, they leave home as adults, and all they do is they simply they don't have independence at that point because they never learned it. So they simply replace their parents with government, with 9-to-5 bosses, with cultural standards, and he even states that so eloquently in his work. He goes on to say, sexual suppression paralyzes the intellectual critical powers of the oppressed masses because it consumes the greater part of biological energy.
Well,
like
yeah,
and that's perfect right there. I mean, that's a perfect statement right there because it's absolutely true that it. He even says it paralyzes the resolute development of creative forces. So right there, it paralyzes the intellectual rationale and the creative forces because it consumes such a large part of our biological energy.
Well, exactly, and also the idea then of first on one hand suppressing it from the moral church in a way, you know, but then at the same time you have this kind of perversity and very, you know, promiscuity in the media, you know, with this sex idolization on another level. It's still very much suppressed though. But it's still, you know, out there, so it kind of serves the purpose of manipulation because it creates this allure, if you will, of something that just as Reich emphasized that is what takes up our, you know, energy or even focus on that regard. So you're drawn to it at the same time as you're not allowed to be drawn to it because it's, you know, the church tells us that it's immoral or what have you. So we're being, just as you say, it's a very huge schism within the human psyche, and I think that the play on that as a kind of mind control theme, if you will, you know, if you know about breaking up the mind into fragments and traumatization and etc. You know, huge story there, absolutely.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you pretty much hit the nail on the head right there about how it's played upon in the media, and I come from the school of thought where I understand that there are agents, you know, that really do employ this kind of sexual suppression and perversion in a way. But I believe really what our society and our media really has to do with is it's an extension. It's our extended mind at play. You know, when you're looking at the perversion of our, you know, internal workings of our shadow, you're seeing that on a large scale when you're watching the TV. Yeah. When you look, you know, out into your society and your local community, that is literally an extension of your extended mind, of your shadow, playing out in real time. And that's like you said in the media, when you see all the perversion of sexuality, it's kind of it gets to a ridiculous degree because if you think about it, now I'm not for or against any of this, but just look at what is, especially in this society, what is all right for our children to be involved with. You know, there's this game, Grand Theft Auto, and it's kind of an interesting game because I mean I've never played it myself, but I've watched people play it, and it's interesting because the object of the game. And, you know, maybe I'm not completely right about this, but the object of the game is literally to steal cars, to steal purses from old women, to run over those women with the old cars, you know, to basically act as a pimp, to shoot people. You know, the most horrific violence that you can imagine that you see in like action flicks. Yeah. And these are games that 5-6-year-old children are playing, yet make sure that child never sees anything even along the lines of a passionate, you know, movie or something that shows maybe not even softcore porn, but maybe a little bit of nudity or anything that has to do with sex, you know, like that's taboo. But, you know, violence, war, crime, you know, defamation, that's fine. Well, just make sure that.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you, but I have to slink this in here that actually the outcry that did happen over Grand Theft Auto was at actually a hidden kind of Easter egg thing where we actually could have sex with someone in the game, and that was
serious?
Yeah, sure, and that was what people were so upset about because, you know, oh my God, you know, there's sex in the game, but then you can go bash in the head of an old lady and steal her purse or whatever, and that's fine, you know, no problem.
Right. So they're fine with that part of it.
Right. Sheesh.
But it's just this overwhelming idea that sex is taboo. Sex is something that is dirty, So I mean, if you think about it, sex is just as important to the survival of the human race as eating, as
Sure.
breathing, as drinking water. It's just as important. Yet it's what Wright calls compulsory sex morality. Think if you were able to apply morals to eating. If you were to something that's so natural and biological, if you were to apply morals to it, what do they call that? That's bulimia. That's anorexia.
Yeah.
When you're bringing your conscious mind into it and you're basically depriving yourself of something natural or just perverting the idea of it, which is basically what happened in sex. It's a perverted natural biological function. So it's something that nowadays parents are afraid to talk to their children about something along those lines. And in Reich's work, there's a tribe called the Trobriander in the early 1900s that he was studying, or someone else was studying, but he studied the research of that person, of the Trobriander tribe. They're a matriarchal tribe that had really no problems whatsoever with violence or psychological schisms. There's no suicide rate, nothing along those lines, and they allow their children to experiment with sex at pretty much whenever age the children are ready to. And I'm not again, I'm not for or against any of that, but I'm just showing like some of the research that was done. This is what is it? Also, the Eskimo tribe up in Alaska, before before TVs and media was introduced up there, they were holding on to a long, like thousands of years of heritage and culture and history, and then within 15, 20, 30 years of introducing televisions and TV programming and the media to these tribes, within 15, 20 years, the females there was a suicide rate that began to emerge.
Yeah.
There was eating disorders. They were wearing different more Western types of clothing. They had gotten rid of all of their sled dogs and replaced them all with snowmobiles, things along those lines. So it completely eradicated their culture there just through the perversion of these things. So it's really, Reich definitely hit the nail on the head when he talks about what it really is it's an incapacity for freedom. It's not the fact that we want to be free, and because you can intellectually say, yes, I definitely want to be free, but then try it for a moment. Try not depending on the healthcare system or government handouts or pretty much anything that is set up for us to use that we weren't able to get by without it. It's an incapacity for freedom that he's talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea there that you mentioned before about that they want to control us on the most primal levels. If we think of eating, having a house to stay in, shelter, you have warmth, you need certain types of things in order to sustain yourself as a human being, and then on top of that you have sex that we have been talking about. But just think back then of what areas that they primarily have been interested in controlling. If we think about food, for instance, on the last show we talked about Codex Alimentarius, the food code, and that's all about controlling the food supply. There are local farms still left, of course, but they're being eradicated every day. Basically, we have huge industry farms taking over everything, and basically what ends up happening is that we have to go to a store every day and buy the food from over the counter.
Right.
So that's huge control right there. And then we have the energy control, of course, also one of the biggest money schemes going on right now, either be it energy in form of oil or gasoline or what have you. Also the fact that you just plug into the wall and everything is supplied for you. We have the electricity, the hydro, whatever. So obviously the next level of control above that is to control sex, and in that sense I think that they've really done a good job, as it were, to get into the minds of people, getting into the mindset of people and try to get into their morality in order to say to them or convince them of what is right, what is wrong, and what is being dirty. So I think what we're seeing here is basically we're being cornered on all the the most primal drives of all, and that I feel has been